Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another video. In the last week or so I've done a couple of haul videos which I don't normally do, Imprint sale pickups and HMV premium sale pickups, and today I'm going to talk about some announcements from Imprint, even though I don't really do announcement videos either, but there's obviously been some titles that I've been very excited about finally getting a Blu-ray release. I know, first world problems, but there's lots of films that have been on my videos in the past about films that could do with a Blu-ray, and Imprint in their September and October releases have mentioned some films that I just kind of had to talk about because I'm very happy about seeing them in Blu-ray. I mean, obviously Imprint recently released One False Move by Carl Franklin, which is one of the greatest films of the 90s that nobody talks about, so underrated, along with Devil in a Blue Dress. Carl Franklin made two of the greatest American films in the 90s, and that finally got as part of the neo-noir set by Imprint. But obviously in the past I've been really happy about The Beast Must Die finally getting a release. I've only mentioned that 85 times. Obviously Cronenberg's Crash got a Blu-ray release, which we're all very happy about. Obviously The Parallax View, one of those classic 70s films that didn't have a Blu-ray for years, and then two came along at once with Criterion Imprint. Also I made several videos about John Sayles' Matewan finally getting a Blu-ray release, or a decent release of any kind. Again, one of the best American films of the 80s. Then we have Mamet's Oleana getting a Blu-ray release from Indicator. Paul Schrader's Light Sleeper, again this was wonderful, getting a Blu-ray release. Schrader's wonderful Light Sleeper. Another Mamet, his absolute gem of a little film, and one of the essential Indicator releases, Things Change. If you are only used to sweary Mamet, Things Change is just a gentle, beautiful comedy with Don Amici and Joe Mantegna. And as I mentioned before, Devil in a Blue Dress, Carl Franklin, Indicator released this, even though I think it was on like a German Blu-ray, and Criterion have since released a 4K of it. But I mean, Devil in a Blue Dress and One False Move were just absolute gold by Carl Franklin, and again one of the great mysteries in cinema of why Carl Franklin didn't go on to have a spectacular career, because his two films in the 90s are spectacular. So that's some of the films I've been really excited about getting a Blu-ray release. But in September, Imprint are releasing Kurosawa's Derzu Azala, which I know I'm crazy, but I think I actually prefer this to Ran and Kagemusha. Again, I believe this has an Italian Blu-ray, but I think it might just have Italian subtitles. I could be wrong. But Imprint are releasing this in September, and there's another couple of, or most of the September bundle is actually quite interesting, so I have pre-ordered the September bundle from Imprint. Absolutely beautiful Men Against Nature, and I'm so looking forward to seeing it on Blu-ray, because it is one of the essential Kurosawas, even though it's not talked about as much as Kurosawa Goes to Russia. And then the one that really almost moved me to tears is Save the Tiger with Jack Lemmon, from 1973. This is one of the classic Jack Lemmon films, where he plays a character called Harry Stoner, which is perhaps a little apt, as he is in charge of a factory, a fashion house that is struggling, and he's struggling with the changes in the world, the youth movement, his experiences in the war, come back to haunt him. It's just one of the essential Jack Lemmon performances, and it's a Paramount, but Imprint seem to have a word in the ear of Paramount, so it's just absolutely fantastic to get Save the Tiger. Again, Lemmon starts off as one thing. I mean, he's fairly frazzled in this film. You know, he has a meeting with this young girl who again is more in the the counter culture, which is quite hard to say without getting into trouble. And his perspective kind of changes. He's a man who's kind of trapped by circumstances and the choices he makes. And it's just a wonderful film, and it's an essential Jack Lemmon performance that we've really needed as much as we need films on Blu-ray to be in Blu-ray, because for me it's the trifecta, along with The China Syndrome in 1979 and Missing in 1982. Those three films kind of show a different side to Jack Lemmon, obviously shown some of that before, but these three films are just so good, and because it's pretty much because of Jack Lemmon, and these three films really prefigure Shelley the Machine Levine and Glengarry Glen Ross, because there's a lot of Shelley the Machine Levine in his character from Save the Tiger, and a little bit of China Syndrome, and a little bit of Missing. I mean, how Jack Lemmon didn't win the Oscar for Glengarry Glen Ross. He did win the Oscar for Save the Tiger, for whatever that means, but he should have won the Oscar for Glengarry Glen Ross. Again, he does swear a lot in the film, and maybe that's why, but for such a despicable character and the terrible things he does in the film, you still feel sorry for him, or you still feel empathy for him, because again, he's painted into a corner. He has to make choices and live with those consequences. So Shelley the Machine Levine and Harry Stoner from Save the Tiger are pretty much the same guy almost, and it is just so wonderful that Save the Tiger is getting a Blu-ray release from Imprint in October. Again, I do not get paid by Imprint, even though I wouldn't mind it if they did. And the other one in October, there's a couple of Burt Lancaster films, which is very interesting as well, because you can always have some more Burt Lancaster. They're doing the Molly Maguires with Sean Connery and Richard Harris, which I'm looking forward to as well. But the other gem, for me anyway, my opinion is not fact, but the other gem for me, along with Save the Tiger, is Ted Kocheff's North Dallas 40, starring Nick Nolte, J.D. Spradlin, Charles Durning, John Matuszak. For me, the most accurate film about the NFL. And yes, I'm not counting Any Given Sunday by Oliver Stone, which I had to switch off after 20 minutes because it was unwatchable. This perfectly encapsulates the 70s and 80s. And for me, as a Raider fan, that's when the Raiders were actually good. And a lot of this film, you can see similar things which happened on Raider teams. Players smoke. We have the wonderful story about Hall of Fame receiver Fred Blintnikoff, who used to have cigarettes and then throw up before games and then just go out and be a Hall of Fame receiver. And also for me, this film stars John Matuszak, who's probably more famous for being in The Goonies, a film that I've just never really understood the popularity of, but never mind. Who sadly died when he was only like 38, 39. And John Matuszak is a man who lived his life to the max. Unfortunately, like a lot of players in the 70s and 80s, he died of an accidental overdose of painkillers and other drugs, because that's the thing when you're actually playing in the NFL, certainly in those days in the 70s and 80s. You know, you have the best medical care, you have, you know, availability of all the pharmacy drugs. But then if you retire or you're cut or you're thrown to the street, you don't have access to that pharmacy cupboard. You know, the Raiders had a defensive end in the late 80s, early 90s. Mike Wise, who was a good, solid player. Again, you know, there's lots of steroids around at that time. But again, he was a guy that was addicted to painkillers. And that's all well and good when you're on a team. But when you're not on a team anymore, you just can't get those painkillers. And he ended up shooting himself. Suicide by firearm, which unfortunately lots of these guys, because they go from, again, having access to all this stuff, great medical care, to all of a sudden, you know, they can't walk, they've got brain problems, and they're just left to fend for themselves. Obviously, the NFL and the NFLPA has done a better job since the 70s and 80s. But unfortunately, there was lots of guys like Mike Wise and John Matuszak. I mean, Dave Dolby, the Raiders' wonderful centre who won Super Bowls, who should be in the Hall of Fame. You know, he died, I think he was 50 when he died, and he was pretty much homeless. Because obviously in the 70s and 80s, or certainly 60s, 70s and 80s, a lot of these guys actually worked jobs in the off season. It's not like now, and obviously they get paid a lot more money, but they kind of work jobs in the off season. And again, when you retire, if you don't have a plan, you know, there's lots of Tom Brady's and Peyton Manning's who have long careers and then go into business and have their own brands and all that. But you don't hear as much about the players that get lost between the cracks, especially these guys who, let's be honest, a lot of time you go to college, get a scholarship because of your sporting ability, and then you can, you know, the average NFL career is like 3.5 years, so you can tear your ACL, you can be out on the street at like 25 years old. If you don't have your degree, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? And that's why a lot of these guys get bankrupt. They do sometimes get into trouble after they've been retired, or after they've been made unemployed, pretty much. Because that's the wonderful thing about the NFL. The only guaranteed thing about your contract is the signing bonus. So when you read these 5-year, $150 million contracts, the key item is the signing bonus. How many years and the amount of money, because you generally never actually see it, because they're always, every year you generally restructure and renegotiate and restructure to get a payment up front. But that's just a mini rant about poor Raider fans, yeah, there's a lot of us. Poor Raider players from like the 70s and 80s who, sadly, like John Matuszak, had not very happy endings. But North Dallas 40, again, they don't use official NFL teams or logos or anything, but it's probably kind of the most brutal satire of the 70s in the NFL. J.D. Spradlin essentially plays Tom Landry, who's the legendary head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, who was ultra religious and, you know, was actually a very good player, Hall of Fame player. He was the first kind of genius coach to kind of realise players are just cogs and just bits of machinery, because lots of the players that played for him said he had pretty much no people skills. He just literally viewed them as cogs of a machine. Obviously Bill Belichick in New England built that dynasty with plug and play players, not the most talented player, but it's just like, do this specific task that I ask you, don't do anything else, just do your job and that's all you do. But Tom Landry was kind of one of the first kind of coaches just to use players as cogs, essentially. And his attitude doesn't really come off very well in this film. Again, it's not about Tom Landry, but J.D. Spradlin is pretty much playing Tom Landry. The guy who wrote the book, I think, actually played for the Cowboys for a couple of years. I could be wrong in that. It's one of Nick Nolte's best performances. Again, he's a kind of aging receiver who needs pain-killing shots to actually play and practice. There's lots of scenes of him trying to get out of bed, and this was the reality for these guys. And it's just fascinating how, you know, he used to be really good, past glories, but the team is kind of wanting to like move on from him, and he just, you know, these guys just love to compete and just love to play. The business side they just weren't really interested in. They were kind of interested in the parties and competing, and again, access to pharmacy cabinets. But again, I don't know how much the casual film fan enjoys North Dallas 40, but for me, it has a special place. Again, a lot of it is just because of John Matuszak. You know, he's not playing under makeup in the Goonies. This is John Matuszak, and he's pretty much playing John Matuszak. He did have a heart of gold, but he was a bit rough around the edges. The stories about him are legendary, and it's just a wonderful film. Again, is it perfect? No, but it's got great performances. Again, Charles Durning's in it as well, and it has one of the great last shots in a film. It's one of the great Nick Nolte performances. Again, an actor that I'm perhaps not that high on. I am not high on Nick Nolte, but every now and again he's really good, like Affliction for Paul Schrader, Thin Red Line, he's wonderful in the Thin Red Line, but he's fantastic in North Dallas 40. Again, it's brutal, it is of its time. It was made in 1979. Not so much a love letter to the NFL, but a kind of realistic view of the NFL in the 70s and 80s. So I apologise if this has just been a rant about the NFL in the 70s and 80s when the Raiders were actually good. But maybe one day, just like getting a Blu-ray release of North Dallas 40, the Raiders might actually get back to winning stuff. So thanks so much for watching this fairly rambling and ranting video. Please let me know what titles you're looking forward to getting a Blu-ray release in the upcoming months, and hopefully you'll join me again for slightly better and more structured videos. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.